Hey, it's me, TB, and today I'm bringing to you a video all about, this is a part 2 to the video I made trying to get people into reading more adult by giving them like kind of a basic where to start. So this is part 2 of the video. In this video I'll be talking about literary fiction, paranormal romance, and science fiction. My previous video talked about, I think, fantasy, nonfiction, and something else. That video was made like 6 months ago, so I have no idea anymore, but I'll have that linked up in the cards and down below so you can go find it that way. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So first off, there is some literary fiction I'm going to recommend. First off, I'm going to recommend The Yield by Tara Jane Lynch. This is a novel about a girl who goes home to Australia after having lived in, I think, the UK for a long time. She decides to move back after her poppy dies, which is her grandfather. And when she gets home, she finds out that some mines want to kind of tear up her homeland and her family's home because there's copper in the area. So she decides to kind of figure out a way to stop them, but she needs to find like some cultural or historical significance there to like kind of stop them. And this novel is told in three perspectives. One is our main character, who I just told you about, and her name is August. And then the second one is her Poppy, and his POV is told in the format of like a dictionary, which sounds weird, but basically he tells you what a word means, and he kind of like gives you a little bit of like a story / backstory to that word about how that affected him in his life. It's really interesting, like really interesting to read about. And third is a missionary who comes to the area to kind of like, as he tries to like help the local Aboriginal Australian population. So there's that too. I think the missionary is like the least common one because I don't remember him coming up a lot, but he's there. I recommend this because this was the first literary fiction that I kind of read by my own. I did read this via audiobook, which probably did help a few things. So I do recommend the audiobook if you can find that somewhere. Next is Frankenstein in Baghdad by Ahmed Saadwi. The author actually retweeted my review of his book, so good for me. But this is about US-occupied Baghdad. Basically, there is a scavenger named Hadi, and he decides to piece together a body so the government will be forced to recognize it as a corpse and bury it properly, because things like bombings and fights, bodies are mostly like pieces now. So he makes his body, except it comes to life, and now it wants to kill and trying to kill people. It's a whole thing. So basically following a variety of perspectives as this is going on, and throughout the other familial drama that happens because of it. For instance, there's a woman whose son died in combat like 10 years ago before this book starts, and she thinks that the monster is her son. It's like kind of sad, actually. There's a lot of perspectives. There's one about a journalist who kind of wants to aspire to be greater, but ends up biting him in the ass. There's stories about this government agency that is investigating occult things. It's like a really interesting book to read about, and I really did like it. It does take a while to kind of get to the body, but if you like the build up in his series, and this is overall a more like literary fiction novel. So yeah, I did really like this, and this was translated from Arabic, and it won the International Prize for Arabic Fiction. So there I go. I read this, I think, in October, and I did really like it. So yeah, this book does talk a lot about how like during this time period, and maybe now, I don't know, but there's a situation where like everyone is so corrupt. Like, who do you turn to if you are a citizen? Because like the government is corrupt against you. There are U.S. forces who don't care about you. And then there are the rebels who will also just kill you for no reason. So like you don't really have any choice in the matter really, because there isn't anyone that is like better than the other. So it is kind of like an interesting thing to hear discussed. And then finally, there's Indian Horse by Richard Pagamise. This is a very heavy novel because it does deal with residential schools in Canada. So there are like triggers for like suicide, self-harm, child molestation, like just a lot. So go into that kind of like expecting to read that because it does get kind of explicit. It's another book that I read kind of on my own and the start of my booktube career, I think. So that's why I recommend it. And this is following our main character, Saul Indian Horse. He's taken to this residential school, and eventually he kind of finds his place in hockey, and he becomes kind of like well known for being a good hockey player, except his life kind of takes a downward turn because there's some issues that he isn't fully addressing, and that's what this book is about. So yeah, it's very heavy, and I will say that this is one of the books that made me cry. So going expecting to probably cry about this. So yeah, it's one thing like with literary fiction, it's kind of hard to explain, like hype it up to you, because like how do you hype this up without spoiling like the whole premise really? But yeah, so I recommend her starting with literary fiction. They're all fairly easy to read. I feel like they're all very engaging about what they talk about. So there you go. So next up is paranormal romance. I'm not like recommending normal romance because I don't read a lot of like normal people romance. I mostly read paranormal stuff like urban fantasy. So it's kind of like what I know best. So first up we have The Absinthe Earl by Sherilyn Fisher. This is an alternate history that takes place in Ireland, where basically Ireland has like its own queen, and people, there are actually like fairies going around still. So basically our main character is Ada Quicksilver, who is a university student, and she's there in Ireland to kind of study fairies because that's what she's like kind of like is writing her paper on, I guess. And she's there to kind of investigate how absinthe kind of helps people see more fairies, or like increases the likelihood of sighting fairies. And while doing this, she meets Edward, and he tells her that his family is very rich, and they have just like discovered this mound, and he takes her to go investigate it, and then fairy stuff happens from there. Because like kind of like plot twist, but not really. He is kind of like, he's like part of the Fae bloodline basically. It's like weird to explain, but the book explains it like way better. But it is kind of like a plot twist, so I'm not going to tell you right now. But he is like Fae technically. Actually, the book tells you in the back, so I'll show you now. He is basically a lord of both like the real world and in fairy world, so he's like a very like high up dude, and it's kind of manifests in like an alternate personality of sorts. So yeah, it's kind of like weird to read about. I did really like this when I read it. I did buy the sequel, but haven't gotten around to reading that just yet. But I did really like it. The smartness is very nice as well. So there's that. There's interesting use of like fairy lore as well as like just general like Irish mythology, and there is even a pronunciation guide at the start, so you really know how to like pronounce everything. So yeah, it was really good, and do recommend this. Next up is A Taste of Blood Wine by Frida Warrington. So to pitch this to you, this is like very much like no plot, all vibes, because this takes place after the First World War in England in 1923. And our main character is Charlotte, who's kind of like the middle sister, and she wants to kind of be investigated, like be involved in her father's scientific studies. And while doing this, his father takes on a new assistant in the form of Karl von Woltendorf. And spoiler alert, Karl is a vampire. It's very obvious because we kind of get his POV too. And she becomes obsessed with Karl because of course she does, because vampires. And stuff gets pretty wild. Again, it's just kind of like no plot, all vibes, because like it's weird to explain, but also like so fucking good. I give it 5 stars because the vibes are immaculate. So good for this book. This book does also have a very interesting take on like vampire lore. So you want something like that, here you go. But yeah, if you want like some like historical fiction plus vampire romance stuff, here you go. This is part of it. This is part of like a series, I think, where like each book kind of like continues on these characters' story. I have not read the next book yet, but I do want to in 2022. So let's hope I get to do that. So that's basically what this book is about, because again, there's like no plot, just vibes, because like they are literally just chilling and like being together for like a pretty long time. So yeah, just going to expecting like kind of like a slower paced, but the atmosphere is very nice. And then finally, there is Tiger's Eye by Marjorie Liu. It's kind of like the first like adult paranormal romance that I read. I did read it, and I did like it so much, like that's why I'm kind of putting it here, because it's kind of like my starting point into the overall genre. And this is a part of like a long-running series called the Dark and Steel series, I think. And basically, Dark and Steel is like investigation firm, I guess. They're basically like private detectives who can like find stuff, pretty much. So our main character is this lady. I forget her name, but she's kind of like important, but who cares? You read this for the man and not the woman usually. So she's in China. I think she's on vacation because she's like a sculpture person maybe. Anyway, she's in China doing like research or like just like chilling, something like that. Anyway, and then she goes to one of the like markets, and she buys this box for very cheap. And when she opens it, a man comes out, and it turns out that this man is a were-tiger, except his powers have been taken away from him, and he's cursed by this wizard. And now, of course, they have to go on a quest to kind of take down this wizard and get this were-tiger his powers back. So, Dark and Steel is a paranormal investigation service, kind of, where like every person has their own powers. So for instance, our main character in here, she can like touch stuff and see the past about it. So there's that too. I've read the first 3 books in the series, and I did love the first 2. The third was kind of but that's more to do because I didn't like the third book's like couple. The couple in A Tiger Eye is very nice. I would say the first half is kind of just like them chilling in her hotel room, just like fucking pretty much. There's like a little bit of action here and there, but it is like mostly them just like flirting, romance, fucking. And the second half is like usually more action packed. So go on expecting that. But yeah, this is kind of what I got into adult paranormal romance. That's what I recommend this to you here. So yeah, chapters in this book, at least on audio, are very fucking long, like over an hour of like audiobook. So get ready for that. But still, I did really like it. Finally, there's like adult science fiction. I will say that these are all classics because that's what I read to kind of get into sci-fi, if I don't read it anymore because I just don't like sci-fi usually. But anyway, so I would be stupid not to mention this, but I'm going to mention We by Eugene Mountain. It's kind of the first book that kind of got me back into reading when I was in like a very long time slump. This book just have like math in it, but here's the thing, I'm pretty dumb and I kind of like just ignored the math and I still give this book 5 stars. So I would say do that. If like you get confused about the science stuff, kind of like ignore it because it's not really important. So it's kind of like the precursor to 1984 and Orwell, whoever, he stole like a lot of ideas from this book. I think this book's kind of like the more like dangerous version of 1984 because the actual like consequences for his actions here, whereas like in 1984 he's kind of like you just do whatever you want basically, even though the society is like oppressive apparently. But anyway, so here we are in the place of one state. I think our main character is only known as a set of like numbers. I think basically the main character is kind of tasked with writing down a general like guide for civilization because one state is planning on sending people out into outer space to meet aliens so they can kind of like spread their ideology further. Of course, it's a novel, so it kind of gets off track. He talks about his own feelings and kind of understands. He kind of like deconstructs one state's ideologies and like why kind of she's like just living in this dystopia. Eventually he meets a woman just part of the resistance. I also will say that I like the ending of this a lot more than I liked 1984. So going with that, with knowing that too. As a whole, this is kind of like if 1984 was like better because this is what it is. So there you go. Since I've talked about it so much already, I will recommend 1984. I want to talk about it because like everyone already knows what it's about, but everyone else loves this book and I fucking hated it. So here you go. I'm talking about it. It's basically if We was like more misogynistic, if the main character had rape fantasies. So there's that. I personally would not recommend it, but I know everyone else loves it. So there you go. A lot of people say that was kind of like the book that got them into reading again. So read it if you want. And then finally, there is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. I think it's my second book by this author. Basically, our character lives in the 1980s in like a dystopia sort of. You don't learn a lot about her like present day really, because eventually she's just like chilling around and she gets warped back in time to the 19th century where she's forced to save this white boy over and over again. And basically she keeps being pulled back just as this little boy is about to die. So she saves him over and over again. It's kind of like the main like plot thing, I guess. Basically kind of talking about, or like, God, this book's so weird to explain again, because like without spoiling things. But okay, I'll spoil this because it's kind of like interesting to read about, and kind of like a big like plot thing makes a lot of interesting discussions happen within the book. But basically, this little boy is one of her ancestors. I think he ends up raping one of her other ancestors, and that is how she kind of gets born eventually. So that's why she's being like brought back and forth, and she also gets stuck in the past eventually. At one point, so she'll be kind of like see her just to be there for like a very long period of time. It's very interesting. I know, kind of like I did a good job of like selling it. Like I swear, if you want like kind of like a light sci-fi, here you go. This just take place mostly in the 19th century, so it is mostly focused on the historical parts, but are like still like sci-fi-ish elements and the time travel. So there you go. And as a whole, Butler is like a good starting place for sci-fi because a lot of her books are very like good just as a whole. I would also recommend Parable of the Sower if you want to. If like this doesn't appeal to you, there's also Parable of the Sower. So there you go. So those are the books I would recommend if you want to kind of get into a foothold into adult fiction. In this video, I talked about literary fiction, paranormal romance, as well as science fiction. So there you go. Again, I have kind of part 1 linked down below as well as in the card, so you can go there and read and watch part 1 as well. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you like the video, subscribe, like, share all that. Hopefully I will see you next week.